When I came back from my trip, a moving truck was parked in front of the house. At first I thought it was the neighbors. The men were carrying boxes, chatting, laughing like they were starting a new life somewhere. Then I noticed the blue vase in one of their hands. My vase. The one Richard bought me on our 30th anniversary. My breath caught in my throat. I walked closer. The grass was still wet from last night's rain and the for sale sign squeaked in the wind. My house, my husband's house, was up for sale. Daniel, my son, stepped out of the doorway. He looked surprised, not guilty, just uncomfortable, like someone caught in a small lie he didn't know how to explain. "Oh, Mom, you're back early," he said, smiling the way people do when they want you to calm down before you even speak. "What's going on?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "We thought maybe it's time for some changes." I stood there, suitcase in hand, watching strangers walk through my living room, carrying out pieces of my life. Framed pictures, throw pillows, even the old rocking chair I used to read bedtime stories in. Megan appeared behind Daniel, her perfect blonde hair untouched by the wind. "It's for your own good," she said softly. "This house is too big for you now." Too big. That's what they called the home where I raised Daniel, the home my husband and I built brick by brick. The place where every wall still smelled faintly of the dinners I used to cook, the laughter I once thought would never fade. I didn't argue. I just walked past them into the hallway that suddenly felt smaller and colder. My steps echoed. Every room looked half empty, half alive, like someone had already decided I didn't belong there anymore. The dining table where we had Christmas dinner last year was covered in packing paper. The photo of Richard and me, the one in the silver frame, was gone. I opened the kitchen cupboard. Empty. Even the spice rack was gone. Who takes spices from a widow's house? Daniel was still talking, saying something about downsizing, about how he and Megan had handled the paperwork. His voice blurred, distant, like it was coming through water. I stared at the empty shelves, the nail holes where family pictures used to hang. My fingers traced the marks. For a moment I thought of saying something, anything. But then I remembered what Richard once told me. "Silence can be louder than shouting, Mary." So I stayed quiet. I turned, walked outside, and looked at the house one last time. The men were closing the truck doors, dust rising from the driveway. My reflection shimmered in the window of the truck. Small, tired, almost transparent. They were moving my furniture. But deep down I already knew they were moving something else. Me out of their lives. That night I didn't go back inside. I sat in my car across the street, watching the house through the windshield like it was someone else's home. The porch light flickered. Megan's laughter echoed faintly when the movers left. She closed the door and drew the curtains as if I were a stranger who had no reason to look in. I stayed there until the sun started to rise, the air turning gray and still. My coffee thermos was empty, my hands stiff from the cold. At 6:45 the moving truck pulled away. I waited until the street was quiet again before I stepped out. The key still fit the lock, but the door stuck halfway like it didn't want to open for me anymore. Inside the house smelled different, too clean, too hollow. The faint scent of lemon polish covered the air, erasing everything familiar. My kitchen table was gone. The calendar I used to mark birthdays was ripped from the wall. The refrigerator hummed like nothing had changed, but inside it was empty except for a bottle of water and half a lemon. There was a note taped to the counter. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll handle the sale. You deserve peace and comfort." No signature. Just those words in Daniel's handwriting. Peace and comfort. That's what people say when they want to get rid of you politely. I walked to the back door. The small garden Richard planted was overgrown, weeds crawling over the stepping stones. The rosebush he loved was dying, petals scattered like old confetti. I stood there, the morning sun hitting the kitchen window, and for the first time since he passed I whispered his name. "Richard, they're selling our home." The sound of my own voice startled me. It had been so long since I'd said his name out loud. I drove to the motel off Highway 17, the same one where travelers stop for a night and leave before sunrise. The clerk didn't ask questions. He handed me a key without looking up, as if he'd seen this story too many times before. Room 102 smelled of bleach and loneliness. The air conditioner rattled like an old man's cough. I placed my suitcase on the bed, sat beside it, and stared at the beige wallpaper. For a moment I thought about calling Daniel. Asking him why. Asking him if this was really what he wanted. But the image of Megan standing in my kitchen stopped me. Her perfect calm, her voice too smooth to be kind. It's for your own good. I lay back on the bed, still wearing my coat. The ceiling was stained with water rings. The hum of traffic outside faded into a kind of silence that felt heavier than noise. I thought about how every time I tried to do the right thing, keeping peace, avoiding arguments, trusting family, it somehow led me here. Alone in a motel room while strangers packed up my life. Around noon my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Everything's almost done. Don't stress yourself, Mom. I'll come by later with some paperwork. Paperwork. Always paperwork. They'd turned my life into a file folder. Something to be signed, notarized, and forgotten. I stared at the screen until the text blurred, then placed the phone face down. I won't sign anything, I whispered. Outside, a delivery truck honked twice. I got up, pulled the curtain aside, and watched people coming and going, living their ordinary lives, not knowing that, across the street, a woman had just lost the last thing that connected her to her past. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat back down, folded my hands on my lap, and told myself one thing. If they thought I'd disappear quietly, they didn't know me at all. The next morning I woke before sunrise. The motel curtains leaked a thin line of gray light across the bedspread. I hadn't really slept. My mind kept replaying every word Daniel and Megan said, every small thing I had ignored because I wanted to believe they loved me the way I loved them. I made coffee in the lobby, the kind that tastes like burnt paper, and sat by the window. A man outside was loading his truck for work. I watched him tie the straps down, careful, methodical, the way Richard used to do before leaving for the mill. That memory hurt more than I expected. By 7 I was driving back toward town. I told myself I only wanted to see the house one last time before the papers were final. But when I turned the corner, my heart froze. The driveway was empty. The for sale sign was gone. Curtains drawn. It looked like no one had ever lived there. I parked across the street. The mailbox had been replaced, shiny and new. My name, Mary Parker, had been removed from it. Someone else's sticker was already there. The Owens family. It hadn't even been a week. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel. My pulse thudded in my ears. They hadn't just sold the house, they'd erased me. That's when I remembered a conversation from months earlier. Megan had called, sounding overly sweet. Mom, Daniel's been so stressed about the mortgage. Maybe it'd help if we moved the title into our name just for now. Taxes, you know. I'd laughed then, thinking she was being dramatic. It's fine, honey. The house is paid off. She paused. Right, of course. Another memory. Daniel asking me to sign a few documents before my trip. I'd been packing, distracted, and he'd said, "It's just for insurance." I signed without reading. My stomach turned remembering that. I drove to the small cafe on Maple Avenue, the only place that still felt familiar. The waitress, Ruth, recognized me. "Haven't seen you in a while, Mrs. Parker," she said, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. I nodded. "Been away." She hesitated. "I saw your son at the bank last week. He said you were moving to Arizona." My spoon stopped midair. Arizona. Ruth frowned. "That's what he told the loan officer. Something about closing your account and transferring everything." For a moment the world tilted. I gripped the table to steady myself. I thanked her, left a few dollars under the cup, and walked out before my legs gave way. The wind outside carried the smell of cut grass, sharp and clean, like something ending. In the car I opened my purse and found the duplicate key Richard had hidden years ago in an envelope labeled "just in case." My fingers trembled. Maybe it was time to see what was really going on. I started the engine, looked at the house one more time through the rearview mirror, and said quietly, "You sold me out, Daniel. But I'm not done yet." Then I drove toward the lawyer's office downtown, the same one that handled Richard's will, the only place left where my name might still mean something. The lawyer's office hadn't changed since the last time I was there. Same worn carpet, same smell of old coffee and dust. Mr. Jacobs looked up when I walked in. His hair was whiter now, but his eyes were the same calm gray I remembered from the day he read Richard's will. "Mrs. Parker," he said, surprised. "It's been a while. What brings you in?" I sat down, clutching my purse. "My house. Daniel sold it. I think he forged my signature." He didn't react right away. Lawyers never do. He just nodded slowly, opened a folder, and typed something into his computer. "Do you still have a copy of the deed?" I shook my head. They took everything. He leaned back in his chair. I can pull the records. His fingers moved over the keyboard, the sound sharp in the quiet office. After a minute he frowned. The property transfer was filed 3 weeks ago. Signature matches yours, at least on paper. My throat tightened. I was in Oregon 3 weeks ago. He glanced up. Do you have proof of travel? Yes. Plane tickets. Receipts. He gave a small, knowing nod. That might save you. While he printed copies, I looked around the office. The same bookshelf. The same clock that ticked too loudly. I remembered sitting here 15 years ago with Richard, holding his hand as Mr. Jacobs read the will. Richard had smiled at me then, that quiet smile that always made me feel safe. He'd said, I just want to make sure you'll never have to worry. And I'd believed him. When the lawyer slid the papers across the desk, I stared at my own name in bold letters. Forged, stolen. She's good, I murmured. Megan. She learned how to copy my handwriting from birthday cards. Mr. Jacobs sighed. Family disputes like this are ugly, but forgery is still forgery. We can contest the sale. I nodded but didn't answer. My eyes drifted to the window. Outside, people were walking their dogs, laughing, living normal lives. I wondered what they'd think if they knew that inside this little office sat a woman who'd lost everything she thought was hers. He cleared his throat. Mrs. Parker, there's something else. Your husband left an addendum to his will. It wasn't public because it only took effect if you sold the property. I looked up. An addendum? He opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. He wrote this about 6 months before he passed. Said you'd know when you needed it. My hands trembled as I took it. The paper felt old, soft from being handled too much. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single handwritten note. If this finds you, Mary, it means someone tried to take what's ours. Remember the bank box under my name. Number 1172. You'll need it. The words blurred through the tears. I hadn't realized were there. Richard had known. Somehow he'd known. I folded the letter, slipped it back into my purse and stood. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. I think I know what to do next. He nodded, his voice low. Be careful. Family greed can be crueler than strangers' lies. I walked out into the sunlight, clutching my bag like it carried the last piece of him. The wind tugged at my hair. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like strength return to my chest. They thought they'd taken everything. They forgot Richard never left me unprotected. And now I was going to find out what else he'd hidden, for me and maybe against them. The next morning, I drove to the First Federal Bank downtown. The same place Richard and I opened our first savings account 40 years ago. The building hadn't changed much, though everything around it had. New coffee shops, a fitness center, glass offices. I parked a block away and sat for a moment, watching the automatic doors slide open and shut as people hurried in and out. My heart beat too fast. I wasn't even sure the box still existed. But Richard's words kept echoing, "You'll need it." Inside, the lobby was cool and quiet. A young teller looked up and smiled the way people do when they see an old woman alone. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" I handed her my ID. "I'm here to access a safety deposit box, number 1172. Under Richard Parker." She typed quickly, then frowned slightly. "That's listed as inactive, but it hasn't been closed. You're still authorized." My throat tightened with relief. "I'd like to see it." She nodded, called for a manager, and within minutes, I was led into a small, windowless room. The manager handed me the metal box and left me alone. My hands trembled as I slid it open. Inside was a stack of old photos, a sealed envelope, and a small leather notebook. The photos were from when Daniel was a boy. Fishing trips, birthday cakes, a photo of him sitting on Richard's shoulders. I held it against my chest for a second. Then I opened the envelope. It was a letter in Richard's handwriting. "Mary, if you're reading this, it means things didn't go as planned. I've kept copies of all the property documents, insurance, and savings under your name in this notebook. If anyone ever tries to move the deed or your account, you'll have proof. Keep calm. Use what's rightfully yours. And remember, silence isn't weakness. It's strategy." My breath caught halfway through the letter. He had known exactly what might happen. I opened the notebook. It was full of copies of bank statements, signed deeds, insurance forms, and one recent entry written in his shaky hand. Spoke to Daniel about Megan's financial ideas. Noted her questions about power of attorney. Watch her. A chill ran through me. My son had been warned and he'd chosen to ignore it. I closed the box, feeling the weight of both love and betrayal pressing down on my chest. Richard had tried to protect me from beyond the grave, and Daniel had undone it all for money. When I came out of the vault, the young teller smiled again. "Everything all right, ma'am?" I nodded. "Better than it's been in a long time." Outside, the wind smelled like rain. I stood on the steps, the city moving around me, and for the first time I didn't feel invisible. I had something they didn't know about, a piece of truth sharp enough to cut through every lie they'd told. I looked down at the small notebook in my hands and whispered, "You tried to erase me, Daniel. But your father made sure I'd still have a voice. The next move would be mine, and this time I wouldn't stay quiet." That evening I sat at the small table in the motel room, the notebook open in front of me. The air conditioner hummed like a nervous heart. I read Richard's handwriting again and again, tracing each word with my finger. It wasn't just a note. It was a warning, a map, and a reminder that I wasn't crazy. I took out my phone. My hands shook as I dialed the number on the lawyer's business card. Mr. Jacobs answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Parker?" "It's me," I said. "I found the box. Richard kept everything." There was a pause. "Good. That means we can prove the sale was fraudulent. Bring the documents tomorrow morning and we'll start the process." I thanked him and hung up, staring at the phone for a long time. My reflection in the black screen looked older than I remembered. Sharper too. When I was young, I thought strength meant being quiet, patient, kind no matter what. But as I sat there surrounded by motel wallpaper and memories, I realized strength could also mean standing up alone when no one else will. I took a deep breath and opened the notebook again. Richard had marked every date, every transfer, every account. I found one line circled in red. "Account shared with Daniel, review after 10 years. I grabbed my purse, the letter, and the notebook, then drove to the 24-hour ATM near the bank. I inserted my card and checked the balance. My account was almost empty. The number stared back at me like an accusation. They hadn't just taken the house, they drained my savings too. The next morning I arrived at Jacob's office before it opened. He looked startled to see me waiting by the door. "You're early," he said. "I've been early my whole life," I replied. It never helped before. Maybe it will now. Inside, I laid out the documents from the safety deposit box. He examined them carefully, flipping through pages. "This is solid evidence," he said. "There's no way your son and daughter-in-law can keep that house once this goes to court." I didn't smile. "I don't want revenge," I said softly. "I just want what Richard and I built." He nodded. "You'll get it." When I left the office, the sky was bright, the kind of blue that almost hurts to look at. I sat in my car and watched people crossing the street. Parents holding children's hands, couples laughing, an old man feeding birds on the bench. I used to think I didn't belong in that world anymore. But now, for the first time in months, I felt like I might. I turned the key, the engine humming steady beneath my hands. Daniel and Megan had taken my peace, my home, my trust. But not my proof and not my will to fight. As I drove back toward the motel, I whispered to Richard, "You were right. Silence can be power. But not today." Tomorrow I'd start making noise. The next day I didn't go back to the motel right away. I drove to the neighborhood I used to call home. The street looked the same except for one thing. My house now had a new mailbox, a new number, and someone else's curtains in the window. I parked down the block. For a moment I just sat there letting the sight sink in. Then I noticed Daniel's car in the driveway. He was home. I don't know what part of me decided to do it. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the quiet anger that had been building in me for weeks. But I got out, walked up the driveway, and knocked on the door. Megan opened it. She froze when she saw me. Her perfect smile cracked for half a second. "Mrs. Parker, I didn't expect." "Clearly," I said. "Is Daniel here?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. "He's busy, but I'll wait." Inside, the living room looked different. New rug, new furniture, but it still smelled faintly of my lavender candles. The ones I used to keep by the fireplace. Megan must have kept them for show like trophies. Daniel walked in from the hallway, phone in hand. His face went pale. "Mom, you shouldn't be here." "Then you shouldn't have sold my house." He opened his mouth, closed it, then glanced at Megan. "We thought." "No," I said. "You didn't think. You decided. You signed my name and emptied my account." You turned your father's promise into your property. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to break glass. Megan tried to recover first. It was for her own good. She's old, I raised my hand. Don't finish that sentence. I set the notebook on the coffee table. This, I said quietly, is proof of everything you did. Every signature, every transfer, every lie. Daniel's face drained of color. Where did you? From your father, I interrupted. He trusted you. He thought you'd take care of me. Instead, you took everything he left. He rubbed his forehead. Mom, please, it's not like that. Megan said. I repeated slowly. Yes, I'm sure she did. For the first time she looked nervous. Her hands fidgeted with her ring. You can't prove. I can. And I will. I closed the notebook, slipped it back into my purse and turned to leave. But before I reached the door I looked back at Daniel. You still have time to make this right, I said. But that window's closing fast. He didn't answer. He just stood there staring at the floor while Megan whispered something I couldn't hear. Outside, the wind carried the smell of cut grass and rain. I walked slowly toward my car, my heart steady for the first time in weeks. I knew they'd panic as soon as I drove away. They'd start calling lawyers, deleting files, maybe even trying to spin another lie. But it didn't matter. For the first time, the power wasn't in their hands anymore. It was in mine. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The motel was quiet, except for the hum of the vending machine outside my door. I hadn't slept much, but I didn't feel tired, just clear. On the small table lay Richard's notebook, open to the page with his handwriting. I ran my fingers across the words, almost hearing his voice. Use what's rightfully yours. At 8 o'clock sharp, I walked into Mr. Jacobs's office carrying the notebook and a brown envelope. He was already waiting. Did you find what you needed? He asked. I did, I said. And I think it's enough to end this. He flipped through the papers while I spoke. The copied deeds, the fake signatures, the notes Richard had left behind. I watched his eyebrows rise slowly as he pieced it together. They weren't subtle, he said. This kind of forgery leaves a trail. I don't want to humiliate them, I said quietly. But I won't be erased either. He nodded. We'll file the motion today. Once the court sees this, the sale is void. Your son and daughter-in-law will have to explain how your signature appeared on documents filed while you were out of state. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. Good. Before I left, Mr. Jacobs handed me a copy of the filing. This is your proof now. Keep it safe. Outside, the sun was high, sharp against the glass buildings. I walked down the steps slowly, holding the envelope like it was a heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid of losing something. The worst had already happened. Now it was their turn to worry. Back in the car, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. I didn't reply. Not yet. I drove to a quiet park nearby and sat on a bench under the old oak trees. Kids were playing, people walking dogs, life moving on. And for once I wasn't just watching from the sidelines. I opened the envelope again, the sunlight catching on Richard's handwriting, and whispered, You did good, Richard. You always did. Somewhere behind me, church bells rang 11 times. I took that as a sign. Not forgiveness maybe, but closure beginning to take shape. They had taken everything I owned, but I still had truth. And truth, once written, can't be erased. By the time I got back to the motel, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Daniel had called 6 times. Megan twice. I let every call go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear their excuses. I'd spent my whole life listening to them. Around noon there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there. He looked older than I remembered, his shirt wrinkled, eyes hollow like he hadn't slept either. Mom, please, he said quietly. Can we talk? I stepped aside. You have 5 minutes. He walked in, glancing around the small room like it embarrassed him. You didn't have to go to a lawyer, he started. If you just let us explain. Explain what? I interrupted. That you forged my name, sold my house, took my money. He winced. Megan thought it was best. We wanted to help you downsize. The market's good right now, and... I laughed softly, but it wasn't kind. You sold your mother's home for the market. Mom, it wasn't just about that, he said, voice cracking. Megan said you were losing track of things. She thought. She thought if she made me look weak you'd hand her everything, I said. And you did. He looked away, guilt creeping up his face. I didn't know she filed the papers until it was done. Then you knew after and you still didn't stop her. He didn't deny it. Just sat there staring at the motel carpet like it held all the answers. I went to the bank, I said. Found your father's notebook. He warned you, Daniel. He wrote your name in it. His head shot up. He what? He saw what was coming. You didn't listen. Daniel's voice broke. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I said softly. You meant to make your life easier. You just didn't think I'd still have fight left in me. He stood there for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket. Here, he said, placing a small key on the table. To the house. I don't know what Megan's going to do, but I'm done. I looked at the key, then at him. You can't undo what you did, I said. But walking away is a start. He nodded once, quietly, and left. When the door closed, I picked up the key and held it in my hand. It was cold, heavier than I remembered. For the first time, I didn't feel pain holding it. I felt power. A week later, I walked into the courthouse with Mr. Jacobs by my side. The building smelled like paper and polish, the kind of place where truth always felt heavy. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from the weight of everything that had led me here. Daniel sat on one side of the room, Megan next to him, her eyes fixed on her phone like none of this mattered. She looked smaller without her confidence, her usual sharp smile gone. Daniel couldn't even meet my eyes. When the judge entered, the room went silent. Mr. Jacobs stood and presented the evidence. The forged signatures, the bank records, the travel receipts proving I wasn't even in the state when the papers were filed. Every document Richard had saved was now spread across the table like small pieces of justice. Megan's lawyer tried to argue it was a misunderstanding, that Daniel believed he had power of attorney. But the truth doesn't need decoration. It speaks for itself. When Mr. Jacobs pointed out the notary's falsified stamp, the judge's expression hardened. I didn't look at Daniel, not once. I kept my eyes on the letter Richard had written, folded neatly in my purse. The words gave me strength. Silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. After an hour, the judge spoke. This court finds the sale of the property fraudulent and void. Ownership remains with Mrs. Mary Parker. Furthermore, any funds taken from her accounts must be returned within 30 days. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. It was the cleanest sound I'd heard in months. Final, sharp, freeing. Megan stood, whispering something angry to Daniel. He didn't answer. For once, she didn't control the room. When it was over, I walked past them without a word. Outside, the sky was bright, the air warm against my face. Mr. Jacobs smiled faintly. You did well, Mrs. Parker. I didn't do it alone, I said. Richard was with me the whole way. He nodded. He'd be proud. I looked down at the courthouse steps, solid, steady, and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. They took my home, my peace, my trust. But today I took back my name. When I drove back to the house, the sun was setting behind the trees, casting long orange lines across the front lawn. The for sale sign was gone. The windows were open, curtains swaying in the breeze, like the house itself had been waiting for me to come back. I parked in the same spot Richard used to, turned off the engine and just sat there for a moment. The silence felt different this time, not empty but calm. I stepped out slowly, walked up the path and unlocked the front door. The smell hit me first. A mix of dust, paint and something familiar underneath. The walls were bare, the furniture gone, but it didn't matter. Every corner still carried traces of our life. The small scuff marks on the baseboard where Daniel used to run his toy cars. The faint stain on the wall where we'd once leaned the Christmas tree too far. I dropped my purse on the counter and opened the windows. The evening air poured in, soft and warm. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a guest anywhere. I was home. Later that night, I made a cup of tea and sat in the kitchen, staring at the space where our old table used to be. I imagined Richard sitting across from me the way he always did, quiet, listening. I could almost hear him say, "You handled it, Mary. You always do." I smiled, small and tired. "I did," I whispered. On the counter lay the old notebook, its corners bent, pages full of truth. I placed it in the top drawer beside the key Daniel had returned to me. I didn't throw it away. Some reminders shouldn't be erased, they keep you strong. The clock ticked softly. Outside, the streetlights came on one by one. I walked to the window and looked out. The neighborhood was quiet again like it used to be. Somewhere in the distance, kids were laughing, a sound that no longer hurt to hear. I turned off the lights, stood in the middle of the living room and closed my eyes. The house wasn't perfect anymore. It was scarred, empty in places, but it was mine. And after everything they'd taken, that truth was enough to make me feel whole again. The morning light came through the kitchen window, soft and golden. I sat at the counter with a cup of tea the same way I had for decades. The house was still quiet, but this silence felt earned, like a pause after a long song that finally found its last note. The court order had arrived in the mail the day before. The house was officially back in my name. No more signatures to fight, no more papers to read. It was over. I turned the envelope over in my hands, then tucked it into the drawer with Richard's notebook. 2 lives worth of proof, of love, of betrayal, of survival, resting side by side. I walked through the rooms slowly. The floors creaked under my steps, familiar and forgiving. I ran my hand along the wall, touching the faint dents, the faded paint. I didn't plan to fix everything. Some marks deserved to stay. They reminded me of who we were, imperfect but real. In the living room, I placed Richard's photo back on the mantel. His smile still had that steady warmth, the kind that told me everything would be alright even when it wasn't. Next to it, I put a single daisy from the garden, the first to bloom since I came back. It leaned slightly in the vase, but somehow that made it more beautiful. Later, I set 1 extra plate at the dining table just like I used to on Sundays. Habit, I guess. Or hope. I poured coffee into 2 cups and spoke softly into the quiet. You were right, Richard. Silence has power. But sometimes it's the noise that saves you. I sat there for a while, sipping slowly, feeling the house breathe again. Daniel hadn't called since the hearing. I didn't expect him to. Maybe he was ashamed, or maybe he wasn't ready to face what he'd done. I'd stopped checking my phone anyway. Some wounds can't be fixed with apologies. They just heal in time like cracks that fade but never vanish. Still, when the mail came that afternoon, there was a small envelope without a return address. Inside was a folded note. I'm sorry, Mom. I'll try to do better. Daniel. I read it twice, then placed it under the photo of Richard. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. It was enough to know he'd finally said something honest. As evening came, I stepped out onto the porch. The wind carried the scent of lilacs and rain. The neighborhood glowed under the fading light. Kids chasing each other, a dog barking in the distance, the hum of life continuing. I sat on the porch swing, the same one Richard built years ago, and watched the sky turn gold, then pink, then soft gray. I'm still here, I whispered. Not as the woman they tried to silence or the widow they tried to move aside, but as myself. I closed my eyes, let the air fill my lungs, and for the first time since that day I saw the moving truck, I felt something simple and whole. Peace. Because in the end they could take my furniture, my money, even my trust. But they could never take the part of me that remembered how to begin again. And that, I thought, watching the light fade behind the trees, was the truest inheritance of all.